So I've compiled a list of endgame techniques that I think you all would find useful. I know I've definitely found these useful. So the first one we're going to go over today is queen versus pawn on the 7th. And it's really handy to know in which case it's a draw and which case it's a win, because it's not always winning. Okay, so the first example we'll go over. So I'll set up a position here. So I'll say that white is trying to queen here. Okay. And let's set it to be black to move. Okay. So this position, who do you think is winning this, black or white?
What's
that? Well, if white's move is a draw, but is black able to win this, or is it a draw?
It's a draw.
Is it a draw?
Wait, hold on.
It's white to move or black?
It's black to move.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, if it's white to move, he just queens, right?
Yeah,
It's a draw.
It's a win. It's a draw.
No, I think it's a
Yeah,
win.
it's a draw.
It's a win.
Yeah, it's a draw. So even if black gives a few checks, right, tries to pin the pawn. Now it'd be a mistake for white to play the king over, because then the black king can move closer. In this case, it turns out it's still a draw, but you don't want to be doing this. Okay. So assume white plays an intelligent move like there. It doesn't matter, because black can never take this pawn. All white has to do is move the king, move it back in the corner, right? So because black can never take the pawn, it's just a draw. Okay. Now there is an exception, and that is if the black king is close. If the black king can get within 1 square, then it's not a draw. So let's say the black king instead is on this square. Okay. Now we'll set it to be black to move, and in this case, black's actually winning. He can just play the king here. And if white queens, then it's checkmate.
Checkmate.
Okay. So pawn on the 7th on the F file, it's always a draw unless the other king, in this case the black king, can get within 1 square of your king. Okay. Now, just to illustrate, if the king was on g4 instead, it'd still be a draw, because the king can't checkmate white yet. Okay. So that's a good shortcut to keep in mind. Now the F pawn is not the only situation where it's a draw. Do you know where the other file where it's a draw is?
Yeah, you're
right. Right. Either rook file. So if the pawn is, say, here, okay, black's king is over here again, set to be black to move. Yeah, again, this is a draw, because if black tries to stop white from queening, white just hides in the corner. And black can't move the king closer because it's stalemate. So this is another case where it's a draw. Again, though, of course, if the black king is closer, like if it were on f6, then it would just be checkmate. So again, if your king can get within 1 square, then it's over. Okay, so that's really handy to keep in mind. So any file that's not rook or bishop is a win, but those are draws. Now I'll just briefly go over how to win if it's not a rook pawn, right? Or a bishop pawn. So let's say white has pawn on the d file, got a king here. Yeah, we'll start it off with check. Why not? Say king is here. Okay. Now here, the problem is that white can't not protect the pawn. There's no stalemate. And once the white king protects the pawn, the black king moves closer. And the process just repeats. Black just checks until the white king gets in front of the pawn and then moves the king closer. So that's the winning method in this sort of position. So does this all make sense?
So if white tries to hold on to that pawn, they'll get checkmated.
Exactly. If the white king moves away from it, then you just take the pawn and mate as usual.
Yeah.
Exactly.
How is there an exception if it's a bishop pawn?
Oh, because when the king moves away, then it's stalemate. In this instance, when the king moves over here, you can take the pawn without it being stalemate.
Oh, okay, I see.
We can go back briefly to that position before, so whoops. So again, like if we look at this position, see if black takes the pawn, then it's just stalemate. Yeah. So I think that's a really handy trick to know. It's because it's actually more common than you might think in like a pawn race, right? Someone queens first, and then you move your pawn, you're about to queen. And it's really handy to know if you're going into that endgame, well, am I going to lose or am I going to be able to draw this, you know. Or likewise, if you're queening first, can I actually win this? So it's just a useful shortcut when you're deciding whether to even go into this. So, all right. And number 2, I think I know it. Yeah, okay. Rook versus bishop. Now this endgame is a draw, but it's only a draw if you know how to defend it. Okay. So let's say black has a king and a bishop, and white has a king and a rook. And we'll set it to be, say, black to move. Okay. So in this instance, how would you try to defend this as black? Do you head for a corner? Do you head for a side of the board?
Stay in the middle.
Stay in the middle? Well, you can't necessarily force that. Like in this position, you have to move back, and then white can slowly force you to an edge or a corner. You know, for example, you go here, white continues to force you, right? But you can decide which corner to head for, right? You could instead do this and head that way. So, do you head for a corner or just a side of the board?
Corner.
Corner? Okay, which corner? Does it make a difference?
Yes.
Yeah.
You have a bishop. You have a dark square bishop.
yeah.
True.
So, okay, so which corner should we head for?
Light square.
The light squared corner?
Yeah, let's
I
go
think so.
corner.
Very good.
So the bishop can block checks on either.
Right.
Yeah, so I'll show you the reason. So I'll just continue this a little bit. So say here, white continues going forward. Say here.
Check.
And this position turns out to be a draw, right? Black can just move the bishop. Well, it doesn't have to be there, say here. And the point is,
Check.
in this position, it's stalemate, right? White has to move the rook, and then you can move the bishop anywhere that's safe. Okay? Now, if we instead went to the other corner, it's a problem, because just imagine, just say this was a light squared bishop, just for sake of argument, okay? And let's move the king here. Instead, we have this kind of situation. Now it's not stalemate. Now you have to move the king, and then it's checkmate. So the corner does matter. And likewise, you don't want to head for the edge of the board because the same situation happens where your bishop is pinned to your king, and you have to move your king to the side. So you have to head for the color that's not the color of your bishop in order to draw. Yeah. And I actually just had a game happen in a 1-minute game on ICC the other day when I had to draw this. Yeah. You just head for the corner and you draw, right? But that's not entirely useful, but it's good to know. Okay. Okay. What was next? Oh, knight and bishop checkmate. Do you guys know how to mate with knight and bishop? Kind of, okay.
With perfect play, it takes something like 33 moves, does it not?
Yeah, so in the worst case scenario, it should only take you 33 moves, but that's with perfect play.
Okay.
I mean, in practice, it usually will take a little bit longer. But let me just, I'll just demonstrate for you guys, just show you. So here's a little computer you can play on ICC to do this. Okay. Wow, this is going to be interesting. Let's see. Here. Ah, I stalemated. I moved too fast. All right, I should have gotten the other square. Let's try this again. Okay. Let's see. Okay.
Oh my gosh.
Checkmate.
All right. So that's how you're supposed to do it, okay? All right. Now, that didn't take me very long, probably like 45 seconds or something, okay? Now, let's go over this game to review the method. Okay. All right, so there's a key few knight movements you need to remember here. So this part, it's hard to come up with a general method. You just want to restrict the king squares and try to move it back. Okay.
Now the king there was heading for the light squared corner, which is the opposite color of your bishop.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the first point I should mention. When you mate with knight and bishop, you can only force it in the color of your bishop, that corner. So that's why the king was headed for that corner. So you have to force it to the other one. And let's see how to do that here. Okay. So the first thing to remember is that you have to put your knight on this square right here to guard the corner. So your knight has to be on a square that guards that corner. And it has to be on this one so you don't block the bishop's path. So here we guard the corner so he can't run there. And now we guard the other square. So now he has to head further. And I move the knight back. And what I'm doing here is I'm transferring the knight to this square to guard c8. So the king has to continue going to the wrong corner. So here I move the king to guard that square, so I can move the knight there. Now, if he had gone here, I'm just going to play here, and he's going to have to go back anyway. So it makes no difference. All right. And now the placement of the bishop is important too. I played here in order to guard these squares to try to keep the king from escaping the net. Okay. So see, he moved up here, and I just restrict the king. Right? Now the king can't get out in any of these squares. I'm just making a wall. Okay. Now I'm transferring the knight to yet another square. I want to put on an f4 so that I can move the king in closer. On f4, the knight still guards his critical square. Okay. And I move the bishop here, taking away that square, so I can move my king closer. I move the bishop back to guard h6 so he can't run away. And then finally mate, right? So the key squares for the knight there is first want to move the knight there, okay? And then you move, knight moves to there. And then you finally move your knight to here. These are the key squares to remember for your knight. Okay? Now in this particular case is that corner, but if you think about it in the light squared corner or the a1 corner or the h1 corner, then the same concept still applies, okay? Now, the important thing to remember is how to drive the king away from that wrong corner. You see how you just systematically guard the squares that the king can escape to? So first we guard a8 with the knight. By the way, I think it's nice how the knight and bishop kind of switch off. We guard a8 with the knight, then b8 with the bishop, then c8 with the knight, then we guard d8 with the king, okay? And then we eventually bring the knight around, c7, d5, whoops. So the knight goes from here, 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 right? And then back again, and then here. So does this make sense? Now it does take a little bit of practice.
Yeah.
Right? And with the bishop as well, you notice the maneuver where I moved back in order to guard this square. So that's important too. Because you don't want to let the king get out this way and again head for this wrong corner. So Wikipedia has some like really weird methods suggested. I mean, I wouldn't really recommend those. It made no sense to me. To me, this one makes most sense to me. Just systematically guarding these squares along the back rank. Okay.
But if you're defending against this, you see that by trying to head to the wrong corners, you can, and if your opponent slips up in any way, shape, or form, it could be an easy way to invoke the 50 move rule and save a draw out of it.
Yeah. Yeah, so it goes both ways, like he said. But yeah, I would definitely recommend practicing this. I mean, by the way, this is not such a common checkmate to run into. Like I think it's estimated it occurs 1 in every 6,000 games, right? So it's pretty rare. But I think it's useful to know because I think it gives you a better idea of how bishop and knight coordinate. Like I think it's actually important to kind of understand how you can use those pieces. So that's why I think it's useful to learn.
There are apparently 2,300s who have failed to secure championships because they didn't know how to checkmate this way.
Wow.
Yeah. There was a famous case, interestingly enough, between this American Tal Shaked and Alexander Morozevich. And Morozevich had to mate with knight and bishop, or maybe it was the other way around, in order to win the World Junior. Right? and that was a pretty important game. I mean, for one, it's the World Junior, and number two, you get automatic GM title. So
Oh, I didn't know. Wow.
yeah, so that was like a huge game that I forget which one had to win. So I think it was Tal Shaked actually. But yeah, so that's just an example of when it can be useful. And honestly, if you just spend an hour on this, just doing the checkmate over and over again, you'll probably never forget it. So,
Is there a site you guys would recommend practicing this on, or is this?
well, you can play against any computer. It'd be helpful. I mean, ICC just has a nice bot you can play against, but you can do this with any chess computer, right? Just set up a position and then just play against it. So, I'm trying to think of. I don't think you can play against a computer on Chess Tempo, can you? I don't think you can just set up positions.
I don't know about setting up positions. You can through tactics, and you can play further rules, but
Okay.
but I don't know about the ability to set up a position. But everyone has. I mean, most of you probably have an app on your phone, that allows you to set up a game.
Yeah.
Put the pieces wherever you want, and so it doesn't really matter for the purposes of the exercise where you place the pieces. If you centralize your opponent's king, that's probably going to give you the best challenge. So, yeah. So you could. I mean, what Warren did is he used ICC to essentially randomly set up the pieces, which is kind of cool because then you could take you could make it repetitive without requiring you to manually change the setup every time. But any engine should do.
Yeah, there's a funny story comes to mind. So I saw a bishop and knight checkmate one time between Vasily Ivanchuk and I forget who he was playing, and he had bishop and knight and his opponent had a pawn, and it was a blindfolded game, and he was moving his opponent's king into the wrong corner. Right, and everyone was confused, thinking like, why isn't he pushing? He wasn't using the method that I was using to push the king the other way, and people were confused. Like, does he know it's the wrong corner? I mean, what's he thinking? But the point was, his opponent had like a pawn somewhere, and part of the problem with trying to checkmate the wrong corner is you'll achieve a position that's stalemate. But with extra pawn, it's not stalemate, so his opponent had to move. So the position was something like this. I'll try to set it up for you.
So we just force the march.
Yeah, so the position was like this, okay, and we'll get rid of these other pieces. Yeah, something like this, right? And his opponent had a pawn, and they were confused what he was doing, and then he finally got to this position, and then they were like, oh, it's not stalemate, he can checkmate. So I thought that's a rather amusing trick. So
Yeah, it's made one.
yeah, even if black queens, it's just checkmate, right? Yeah. Anyway, I just thought that was a funny story because these were grandmaster commentators that thought Ivanchuk didn't know how to checkmate with bishop at knight. So
Anyone next level on them.
yeah, in a blindfolded game, he saw this, of course. Yeah. Okay, now for this one, we're gonna look at a game for an example. So this has to do with when you have minor piece and a couple pawns for rook. Okay. Close that. Okay. So this is a game between Topalov and Kramnik. Okay, so here white has a couple connected pass pawns and a knight for the rook. Now, who do you think is better in this endgame?
White.
Why do you say that?
Whose move is it?
It's White's move. It's White's move.
Oh, then I would think White's better.
Yeah, white can check and capture a pawn. I don't know.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's black to move.
Oh,
So black played there. Okay, sorry. Okay. Now who do you think is better?
Well, you always say rooks are only good when it's open positions, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so with white having such a good defensive pawns around his king, he seems to be in a better position. Black is pretty exposed with their king.
Very good. Yeah.
Seems like the only way black can win is for some sort of Zugzwang.
Zugzwang.
Yeah, like where the position's locked up and white has to make a suboptimal pawn move or something.
I mean, the only way black can get any counterplay here is by opening up the position, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but yeah, you're right. So white is better in this position is exactly because of the reason you said, because position's kind of semi-closed. And if you have rooks, they operate best in open files, right? And here they don't have really targets to speak of. So even though if you look at this with a computer, it'll say it's about equal, it turns out in practical play, it's pretty much not a difficult win for white. Yeah, this is one aspect where computers really have a hard time for some reason. So, like, I think when I look at this with Stockfish, it just says like 0.00. I'll show you.
Yeah.
Or it even thinks black is better or something. Yeah, but computers have a terrible interpretation of this. I think this game was played in like 1999 or something, and this was a game that Kasparov gave an example of why computers will never, be good at chess or something. Of course, his evaluation was maybe not quite so correct, but because he lost his return match at Deep Blue. But let's see how Topalov mops up. So first he plays Rook C3 because he knows what Kramnik's going to try to do. Kramnik's going to try to play A4 because he needs to open up a file for his rooks. Now, it's technically you can look at it as a pawn sacrifice, but when you have a perfect pawn chain, you separate it in 3, it can never be good. And here particularly, black just wins pawn back right away, pretty much. Okay. So white plays F4. He's just trying to give room for his king to get into the game. This also frees up his H pawn if he wants to advance it. Attacking E6. Again, black has to defend that guy. A cute little move. Knight attacks this pawn, kind of annoying. He has to delegate his rook to defending a pawn. But this is a bad sign in an endgame, when your rook's just having a purely defensive task. And this is another nice move here. So black has a problem because he really doesn't want to push that pawn because it gives white 2 connected passers again. But here he doesn't have a choice. Yeah, if he plays king e6, then just knight g5, and takes the pawn, right? So he has to push, and white just advances. And this move is really nice, just gets rid of a weakling on e3 and breaks up black's connected pawn pair.
Check. Check. Check.
And then finally black just gave up because the only legal move, king e6, and white just takes. And because of the fork, he wins the rook.
Oh.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Wow, that's sick.
Yeah, I went over that kind of fast, but I just wanted to kind of illustrate, even though it's an even material situation, because the position was closed, it really presented a tough position for black. But
Do you think white went into that thinking, let's try to connect these, let's try to get connected pass pawns? Because he had the pass to H pawn, but...
oh, certainly, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, I'm sure Topalov was trying to do that.
okay.
Yeah, I think the point this really illustrates is that if you ever sacrifice an exchange and you have a couple pawns, don't be afraid of the endgame. I mean, I remember I used to think, because it was an endgame, if they had rooks, then I'd be screwed, because rooks are powerful in the endgame. But if it's a closed position, it's usually pretty good for you. And even barring that, pawns are powerful in the endgame. So if you have extra ones, they're usually pretty good. So the main point I want to illustrate here is don't be afraid of the endgame if you've sacked an exchange and you have 2, maybe even just 1 pawn. Because pawns are powerful in endgame, as you saw this in this game right here, right? Okay. Next one. Okay. Opposite colored bishops. Do you guys, what comes to mind when I say opposite colored bishops to you guys?
Draw.
Okay, good. So you guys are already aware of this, okay? Yeah, so opposite colored bishop endgames are notoriously drawn. And do you guys know what the reason for that is?
Well, because if you can, I had this come up in a game where all of my pawns were on the color of my bishop and the color opposite to his bishop, and all of his pawns were on the color opposite to my bishop and the same as his bishop. So essentially it was just king shuffling back and forth until it was a draw, because the pawns were on the same files even. So
Yeah.
I didn't see any potential for either side to break through. It took my opponent about 50 moves to agree to draw, but
Okay.
But it was 4 pawns against 4 pawns, opposite colored bishops, and once those pawns were on the opposite colored squares, they were immune. You know, so long as the king, and they were in pawn chain, as long as the king supported the pawn chain, it was, you know, there's no way to make progress.
Yeah. Yeah, so the problem with opposite colored bishops is you can't attack what your opponent's bishop defends.
Right.
So, like in this instance right here, white has 2 connected passed pawns. Now, if white had a dark squared bishop, this would be an easy win. But white cannot advance that e-pawn ever because he can't defend that square. Black just will move the bishop, shuffle it back and forth on this diagonal forever, and white can't do anything. In fact, amusingly enough, even if white has 3 connected passers here, in this particular position it's a draw, because still white can't do anything with these pawns. You know, if white tries to support the f-pawn, black just goes forward.
That's rough.
Yeah, so keep that in mind in your game. So if you're down material and you have a chance to get opposite colored bishops, then even if you're going into an endgame, it's usually a good idea, because you can set up these kind of blockades like this. And likewise, if you're up ahead in material, try not to get opposite colored bishops, because it's going to be really hard to win even if you have 3 extra pawns. Okay.
Is this a likely position?
This particular one, no, but it can happen. And even without this pawn, so let's have a similar position. So say, even if the pawns weren't yet blockaded, so let's say this is the position, this is also a draw. Again, because now white can push the pawn, but black just takes it. Because we can't mate with a bishop. So yeah, 2 connected pawns usually, if they're not far advanced, it's typically a draw. Okay. Now there is an exception if the pawns are really far apart. Okay. What I mean is, say white has a pawn over here and a pawn over here. Now this is a win for white, because black can't guard both with the king and bishop. He has to move the king to one and the bishop to the other, and white will win the bishop. So when they're separated like that, that's a problem. So interestingly enough, if they're close or even connected, you can defend. But so that's good to know.
Can you go back to the first position with the opposite colored bishops? And
Sure.
I just had a question, 'cause I was trying to figure this out.
Let me.
If it's black move, what? I think the
Bishops.
the bishop is on D3.
Oh, okay, I can
The king
switch it
is
around.
on D4. On D4.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because here, why is it a bad move for if it's black to move? I'm sorry, it's black to move.
Black to move. Okay.
Is it a bad move for bishop to go to F2 and check and force the king away from those?
Oh, it doesn't matter here. Just go back or something.
Oh, you just keep going back. Okay, so it's still okay.
Yeah, you can play almost anything in this position and win.
Okay.
Not quite anything, but almost.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can't go to
King back.
H4, I don't think would be good.
Yeah, that would be bad.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's pretty useful to know. I think it's a good way to draw certain games, right? And a corollary to that is, if you're in the middle game and you have opposite colored bishops and you want to win, don't go to the end game. Even if your opponent offers you a pawn or something, try to keep it in the middle game if you have opposite colored bishops, because that's where you can get chances. Because by contrast, in the middle game, opposite colored bishops can be good because your opponent can't defend the squares that you attack. So they can be a problem for your opponent in middle game situations. But end games are usually safe. So just keep that in mind. It looks like you guys already knew that, but and an interesting extension of that, or this could be considered a corollary of what I'm about to say. So Anand made an interesting comment in one of his annotations to his game with Karpov. Let me get to the game first. Here we go. Okay. So after the following sequence of moves,
check,
Anand says this was a terrible move. Calls it like a crucial mistake. Oh, so by the way, you might observe that black is up a pawn in this position, right? So according to most grandmaster play, black should just win. Okay, but why was this move a mistake for black? I mean, he's even getting a bishop for a knight. I mean, according to my theory, he should just be winning, right?
Well, it gives white a way to make it open file.
What's that?
White will have an open file if they exchange.
Okay, well that's true, but you know, going back to this position, white has a semi-open file anyway.
Okay, so
Check.
bishop takes.
It's not bad for a tactical reason. So why is this exchange a bad idea for black?
Well, would you be taking the bishop back with the pawn?
So what happened was he just took with the rook.
Oh,
You don't want to separate the pawns,
That's
right?
what I was just saying.
Bishop versus knight isn't a win, but bishop versus bishop is.
Well, so typically a bishop is better than a knight in an endgame, right? So that part of it is not bad, and it's part of the reason he ended up winning anyway. Go ahead.
He has a light squared bishop, and all the white's pieces are on dark squares. So
Yeah.
just give up the only piece that could attack.
Oh.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's an important point. So it's very similar to the opposite squared bishop scenario, right? See how all of white's pieces are on dark squares? Only have a light squared bishop. So what Anand says about this is, if you're the superior side in an endgame like this, don't exchange dissimilar pieces. Yeah, it's a really revealing comment to make. I mean, he just says it really casually, like it's obvious, but it's really interesting comment because most people only think of that in terms of opposite squared bishops or something, right? But
Most people think I'm simplifying. I'm trading equal material.
exactly,
It's just gonna improve my advantage.
yeah,
That's,
exactly. You know, and that's a really common thing to think, right? Because you're told you should simplify when you're ahead of material and all that, right? But it's not always a good idea, and it's because of that same reasoning. Because white can put all his pawns on dark squares, where your pieces can attack it, and then there's no way for you to win, right? So whenever you have a winning endgame like this, just keep that in mind. It makes it a lot easier. And when I read this, it had a big impact on my play. Honestly, I mean, I found myself in games now. Like it's a lot easier to convert. Because I used to make the mistake all the time, actually, of just simplifying for the sake of it, even though I'd end up in these kind of positions where it's hard to break through. So it's actually a really handy concept to know. So instead of trying to exchange the knight for the bishop, black should have instead tried to exchange the light squared bishops or the knights or something, right? Like I think he suggested that he should have played, I think it was like knight e8, trying to go for knight c7, d5, and trade the knights. And then once you trade the knights, it's much easier to win, right? So that would have been a much better idea. Okay. So anyway, I think that's an important concept, and it'll really help simplify your life when you're trying to win. Okay. Now you can see in the game, Karpov could have played much better, but he let Anand get away with some stuff. This move was all right. Okay, this was really his first mistake. So here, white should have just taken
Check.
and then go back. And Anand comments that this is probably a draw because black has no passed pawn and white has no weaknesses to speak of. So it's going to be really hard to win this. It might be winnable, but it's going to be difficult. Okay, in the game, what happened was that black was able to keep this passed pawn on the e-file. So even though it's still not necessarily an easy win, it did make his life easier. Okay, and that's another concept to keep in mind too, that extra pawns are only useful if you can get a passer out of them. Right, so that's why this is a much easier win than the other position without the F and E pawns, because black doesn't have a passed pawn yet. So he's gonna have to work and push them and not lose them in the process, right? Okay, then you can just briefly see how Anand mopped up. He makes it look surprisingly easy.
Check.
And then already Karpov had to resign because he's losing the knight.
yeah.
You know, if knight g1, then just rook g2, and it's trapped. But yeah, the concept from that game again is when you're heading material like that, don't exchange dissimilar pieces. So it's not just opposite colored bishops.
That's not the first, second, third, or even fourth time I've seen Anand trap knights like that. Or not like that, but trapping knights in general.
Yeah. Huh. Okay. Now there's a Kasparov game I want to show you that illustrates a couple concepts. So let's go to it. think this is it. Yeah, okay, this is it. All right, so here we have an endgame between Topalov and Kasparov, and as you can see, black is up the exchange, but white does have a pawn fourth. This endgame is actually not so easy to win because it's kind of closed, right? Again, rooks aren't very good in positions where it's closed. So what's your guys' evaluation here? Do you think black's winning? Do you think white can draw? And what do you think black should do?
I feel like it's even because black's pawn structure is not as good. But I feel like black has chances by doubling rooks on the d file.
Yeah, that's a good point. So what makes this position a little bit difficult is that black's pawns are separated, right? So they could be weak. Yeah, especially that c4 pawn, right?
Right.
And another important point that Lucas noted is that black's probably going to need to take advantage of that d file, right? Because there's no other open file on the board right now. Okay. Now, this makes his first move kind of interesting. He plays h5.
Oh.
So why do you guys think he played this move?
Yeah, open up the file for the rook, right? Just because if he
Well, white is not forced to. White just played g5.
But then his bishop is
blocked in.
it's not going to be doing anything on that side of the board.
Yeah, so he played h5 so that his pawns are not on dark squares, right? Because with a pawn on h6 like this, if white's bishop ever gets around back, then these guys are going to be targets.
Yeah.
So by playing h5, he makes sure that white's bishop is not going to be having any fun. Okay? So you want to make your opponent's pieces play just defensive roles. Okay? Now it can be a downside sometimes because if you heard the saying, bad bishops defend good pawns, you have to be careful that your opponent can't build a blockade. And if black's only file where he can penetrate his d file is going to be a problem. But as we can see, Kasparov will try to open up a different file. So here, white's trying to close off the d file by planting the bishop there, right? But now Kasparov plays f6. So this was his idea here. So he wants to open up either the f file or the g file, right? If white just lets it sit still, black will take. In the game, white decided to open up the g file. Now it doesn't look like such a good thing because it looks like white controls this, right? But black can coordinate his rooks and fight for it himself. Okay. So white tries to keep him off, but it's difficult. Finally, black's managed to maneuver the rook on the g file. Now this move is just kind of cute. He's just trying to stop bishop f8. Because before, when white plays bishop f8, black is forced to take on g5 and give white a passer. But now, black has to do no such thing, because bishop f8, you just take. Right. Yeah, c3 was probably a mistake, although it's not easy to offer advice for white anyway. And it's a mistake because of what he played, actually, king c6. And why do you think he played his king backwards?
So pawn can advance the b pawn.
Playing for the king to play to b5, a4.
Yeah, right. On the king on d5 actually doesn't attack anything, so he's trying to maneuver it down to b3, or it attacks at c3 pawn.
Yeah, it's winning.
Yeah, and it turns out white doesn't really have much of a defense. But the winning method Kasparov uses is still interesting.
So that's the bishop defending your pawn thing.
Yep. So white's bad bishop defends good pawns. Of course, the downside is you have no activity.
And just exchange it.
Yeah, and here is an important part when you're at exchange up in these endgames. The winning method often involves giving back the exchange. Because if you don't take that bishop, there's almost no way you can win, because you do have this passed pawn, but white can just step in front of it and block it. So that's a really important winning method when you're up the exchange, is giving it back to get a passer.
But how do you stop the g-pawn advancing?
Well, it turns out that black queen's first, so
No.
this is a rather complicated example, but
Ooh, okay.
I still think it's a good one. So black queen's first, and in this kind of endgame, it's pretty important.
Check.
So now the problem is it's kind of difficult to defend all these weak pawns and not get checkmated. It may not look like white's in danger of getting checkmated, but you'll see in a second that
Check.
Kasparov weaves a nice mating net here.
Check. Check. Check.
Pawn sack. And now Topalov just resigned because
Worst.
after king d3, it's mate.
Yeah.
The threat's just queen g4, right? And at queen g5, we have, what's the mate?
Queen F2.
Queen f2, yeah.
Checkmate.
Yeah, that's a satisfying word to hear. Did you guys hear the computer say that?
Checkmate.
Checkmate.
But yeah, so I think that's a good concept. So a lot of times, I've seen, class A players even, they'll have a rook versus a bishop or knight endgame, and they'll just never sack it for it ever to get a passed pawn, and they won't be able to win. And I'm just baffled that they don't understand this concept. So this is definitely important to know. Okay. Have you guys ever encountered this? I'm just curious.
Actually, I did against Arjun. I messed up the pass pawn. I sacked my rook for his bishop. So
Okay.
I get the pass pawn, but then I played the pass pawn incorrectly. Didn't protect it with my king. So
It was time pressure. But
yeah,
Tactics, yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, another point that is illustrated in this game is that you can be patient. You see Kasparov made a bunch of moves trying to provoke some weaknesses. He provoked c3 from white, allowing his king to get in. So when you have an extra exchange in these positions, just remember to be patient, try to provoke some weaknesses, and then sack your rook when you can calculate a forced win. So that's the winning method when you're up like that.
I'm surprised he was able to calculate the forced win from the queen race or the pawn promotion race.
Yeah, I mean, I'm impressed too. That will take me a while to calculate.
I mean, it seems like it's one of those things like where Gary would just be like, "But it has to be made somehow."
Yeah,
this has to be right.
Yeah, I think his comments were kind of amusing. Let me see if I can. Oh, I don't have my email up, but yeah, his comments are something along the lines of after he takes on d4, and now black wins the queen race, and he just gives the rest of the moves.
Pretty obvious.
But I mean, it's a good concept to keep in mind too, I guess, when you have king and queen, even in a queen ending like this. If your king is safe, in this case, black's king was shielded by white's own d pawn, then it's really hard to defend that position. So that's good to remember too.
And just a shameless plug, Warren and I will be giving a lecture on Kasparov next Wednesday at Center 64, so Kasparov Part 1. Obviously it's a school night, so if you can't make it, we'll have it up on YouTube the next day. It'll probably be an hour and a half to 2 hours for this one, then another hour and a half to 2 hours. There's a lot to talk about with Kasparov. It's really a remarkable player.
All right, now the last two involve rook endgames. Okay, now this is a position from Wikipedia actually, and this ending right here is supposed to illustrate the concept of building the bridge. Have you guys ever heard this?
Sorry, what's this?
So the concept I'm going to illustrate here is called building the bridge. It's how to win this endgame. So this is this kind of position is called the Lucena position, just for your reference. Not that it's important, but this is the kind of position that if you have an extra pawn and a rook ending that you want to get, because the black king is cut off. But it's not necessarily obvious how to win necessarily, okay? Because say you just try to check black and then move your king out, allowing you to queen your pawn. It doesn't work because
Check.
black can just keep checking you,
Check. Check.
and there's no way you can actually support the pawn's advance, right? So even though it may look like a simple win, black has some tricks with that rook behind the pawn. So going back, how do you think white can win here? Does anybody know the method? Okay.
I attended your lecture.
Rook H1.
Yeah.
Nope.
You said no for that? Rook c8.
Well, rook c8, the king just moves up.
Okay.
You need to get your king space to move out.
Oh, that's right. Okay, I see.
Remember, the problem we're having is that this rook is checking us,
Yeah.
and so we're unable to defend the pawn
C7.
and support.
Yeah.
Rook c7?
No.
I don't see how that improves our position. What's that?
Oh, B1.
You just sack your rook.
Oh, if rook b1, black just shuffles.
Oh, I was like, what? No, I was thinking.
So ideally, you want to avoid sacking your rook and getting a position with queen versus rook because that's hard to win, right?
Okay, I was making sure. Okay.
Now pay attention to this, because when Warren says building a bridge, that's literal, actually. That's in terms of the shape of the chessboard. Okay, so that's why we call it building a bridge.
Rook C3.
Rook C3.
Get closer.
So what are you trying to do there?
Build a bridge.
Good answer. Good
What
answer.
about Rook C6?
Okay, Rook C6. So if you keep moving a rook along the C file, Black's gonna just move his rook along the A file.
Move to like H or G.
King.
Well, if you move it to the H file again, Black's just gonna shuffle.
Okay, so
Rook
let's see.
E1.
And then you can't check on H8.
Oh, well, you can, like, say, rook here, then Black just goes up.
Oh.
But still, you can't get your king out.
Okay, so how are you gonna get the rook to threaten that rook and still have support?
So I'll give you the first move. So this is the first move that's correct. So now we can move the king out. But if we do it right away, like I said, it's a draw, or you can't win immediately because Black just keeps checking you. So how can you win?
So build
Rook D3.
Rook D3?
No.
Close.
Rook in-games make up about 20% of all in-games in chess. So knowing how to win a rook in-game is actually probably the most important in-game to look at, with your time.
Yeah, they have a name for this position because it's so common.
Yeah.
Is it Theodore? That thing?
No, that's the opposite.
Yeah, the Fildor position is a draw. Yeah, this is a...
The Fed is a win.
Yeah.
No, that's not what we're looking for. We're looking for a win. I'm gonna see building a bridge. Okay, no, that won't be. That's
It's close to what Devin suggested earlier.
Rook D4.
you're just picking
Ah.
So you hit on the right idea. So why did you put the rook there?
Well.
So what if Black just stays on the A file again? What did you do?
Well, then what you
Then
can
you
do
move it.
is.
Okay, you move the king. Black checks you.
Check.
And now you go.
Black checks you?
Closer.
Check.
Now you can go King B5
Check.
and then Rook D4.
Exactly. Yeah, so this is the building of the bridge that we're talking about. So now, White connects the king and the rook, and then he can queen.
Jeez.
So the rook was on the 4th rank there.
Yeah, that's important to remember, right? So if you put it all the way on like the 7th rank here, then the rook is to be too far away for you to defend.
Yeah. 5th rank doesn't work either, does it?
Yeah, I don't think the 5th rank even works
No.
because in this position, if your rook was on D3, you can't move your king closer.
Right.
So the 4th rank is important to remember.
Yeah.
Okay.
Occasionally, it can also be the 5th rank as long as your rook's not being taken.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Alright.
So that's how you win it. So does that make sense?
Yeah.
So first, you need to force the king
Check.
off so that you can move your king out, and then you need to be able to move your rook to the 4th rank so you can defend it. So that's really useful to remember because that position happened a lot.
Yeah, and from this point, there's nothing Black can do to salvage a draw. With perfect play, White wins this 100% of the time. It's a forced win.
Yeah. So yeah, this is a good one to know.
Now, endgames are often compared, because they're a type of algorithm. And if you're one of those people that's really strong at memorization, and you can memorize algorithms, like solving Rubik's Cubes, Maxim, then endgame should appeal to you. In fact, there are players out there that are known as very strong endgame players. And there are players out there that may be a 1600 player, but because of their endgames, they're an 1800 player. So if you're one of those people that's really good at memorization and algorithms, and this sort of pattern just makes sense to you, you can get really good at endgames and make good use of that, to get some wins.
Yeah, so this is really good to know. Like seriously, it's definitely worth putting effort into. It happens a lot. Now I'm going to show you another useful one to know. Okay. So here's just an example position. Okay. So in this position, Turns out it doesn't matter who's to move, although I think white's move. What do you think is going on here? Is this a draw, or is black able to win this? It's really important to know because oftentimes you can find yourself in a kind of rook endgame where one side has an extra pawn. So what's going on here?
White can check, but black can't.
Oh yeah, white's definitely gonna have to keep the rook on the A file. And so will black, coincidentally.
Seems like black can centralize the king though, and then make white king choose between the A pawn and those three connected pawns.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like white should be able to make some progress, right? Or sorry, black.
Yeah.
So say it's white's move, say he plays here, just move your king up like this, right?
Yeah.
But it turns out you can't really do anything because white will just check you.
Check.
Oh, I see. There's no way to.
Check. Check. Check.
So moving the king close to the pawn like that doesn't really help.
Okay.
So yeah, interestingly enough, this endgame position where you get the rook behind the pawn is a draw. That's really handy to know. Okay, because sometimes you'll be faced a situation where you might be able to trade down to this endgame, and if you're just lost, you'll feel like an idiot after the game, right?
Is there no way that you can go the white king up to say the third rank, like to G3, and then check?
What was that?
G1. Is there no way you can go the white king up to the third rank?
The white king?
Yeah, if you could go the white king up to say G3, then you can check where G1, and then you win the rook.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so that's important to remember when you're defending this. So don't move your king up to the third rank. Okay? So in this position, for example, this loses right away
Yeah.
because you can queen. But yeah, black can't force the white king to move.
Even with the exchange of pawns or anything like that.
Nope.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, because white can just move the rook forever. It doesn't really matter.
How do you handle situations when you have like 3 pawns and a king versus 3 pawns and a king?
That?
Yeah, it's all weird.
Well, as long as you don't lose material, it should be a draw. And pawn structure does matter a little bit. Double pawns can make it trickier. There was a game which I didn't get it, but there was a position with rook versus 4, rook versus 3, which also good to know is a draw. Okay, for a similar reason. What I mean is, say black's pawn was on E6 instead of on A2, it's still a draw. There's no way to force that win, and that's good to know too, right? If you have a chance of going to endgame or not. But there was an interesting game between Carlsen and Aronian where Carlsen actually won that somehow. It took some help from Aronian, but it's still amazing that he was able to beat a 2800 player in a just theoretical draw in endgame. But it speaks to his strength in endgames. But now I was going to show one important point that I put white's pawn at F4 in this position was I want to illustrate a common way people lose this is King F2 loses here.
Well, you can check.
Well, if black checks on F1, then you just take it.
Rook H1.
Yeah, exactly, because of the skewer. So we're threatening to queen the pawn, and if he takes it, then we win the rook.
Yeah.
So this is a really common tactic in Bipal to fall for. So remember, if you're playing this position, you can move your king, just shuffle it between the G and the H file.
Okay.
Because if you move it up, you lose, and if you move it to the side, you lose. Exactly.
So 2 out of 3 ways he loses.
Yeah.
What if you move pawns?
Well, you want to avoid moving your pawns like in this position, just going back. Because if you just move your pawns forward, it weakens them and black can attack them.
Just take them off.
Yeah. Like say white, advances the pawn here, now all of a sudden he's losing because you're just losing that pawn now. But yeah, instead white can just move the king back and forth like king H2, king G2. And if black tries to help support that pawn, then he can check. So this is really useful to know too. So if you're up a pawn like this, try to avoid going into this endgame because it's a draw. Or if you don't play hope chess, but if you think your opponent's too stupid to know how to draw it, you'd be wary of that, right?
Yeah.
So those were, that's number 10. So those are the techniques that I just found useful, just positions, good to know. So it's been really handy for me.
So there are extensive books on endgames. And if you wanted to improve, it's good to know that there are a couple of big name authors kind of in the endgame market. And depending on where you are as a player, you know, you would probably benefit more from different books. So, to my knowledge, for your rating for 1400 to 1800, I think Sylvan's Endgame course is probably the most recommended. Is that, do you know? I think Dvoretsky's a little bit higher, a little bit more complicated.
Yeah, I'm not really sure about the middle of the spectrum. I mean, Pandolfini wrote a little book on endgames, which is pretty good, and Dvoretsky's is famous, obviously. But yeah, myself, I haven't read any of Sylvan stuff, although I've heard good things about it.
Yeah, I think Sylvan's complete endgame course is pretty decent around your level. And then 1800 and above, Dvoretsky is like kind of an endgame god, at least in terms of training. He is a guy who for many, many years taught with Mikhail Botvinnik in his school in Moscow and taught Garry Kasparov and many other players. So he's kind of well known. But it's considered more technical. So if you want to discover more about endgames, we have a couple of books in the library. I don't think we have Dvoretsky's because we don't have anybody who's really close to that level yet. But Sylvan would be a good place to look to start. And you should also know that computers have solved all endgames with kings and less than four or less fewer pieces of any type on the board. So
It's up to 6 now, I think.
up
Actually,
to 6 now.
Yeah.
So when we say theoretical draw, we mean it's been shown by computers that you can take the king in any 5 pieces and get the king in any 5 pieces, and a computer will tell you who should win or how it should end. So you can practice endgames through Chess Tempo. Actually, they have an endgame trainer just like you do tactics training. So if you wanted to get more practice, that would be a good place to start also. Anybody do that currently? Yeah, Stephen, in the end, you play around with some endgames? Yeah, it's useful because, as Warren says, it'll help you know in the middle game, you know what kind of how you should steer toward for the end game. But in the more immediate sense, when you're at an end game, it'll give you the confidence to know, okay, I'm gonna crush this guy. Here's how I'm gonna do it, you know. And I can tell you that if you're on, I've been on the receiving end of a lost end game a couple of times, and seeing my opponent blitz out perfect moves is pretty disheartening. But it's pretty still. Yeah.
Yeah, Chess Tempo's endgames are great, actually. I mean, I find them great just because just seeing different tactics in different positions, you get a feel for the patterns that exist, right? Like, before Chess Tempo, honestly, I'd never seen this possibility of messing up this endgame by moving king there and then that. So that taught me a tactic to be aware of and look for. And in my games, I guess I never encountered it because if I was defending, I would just thought, oh, if I move there, I get skewered. But it wasn't something I'd actively look for. I'm not sure if that makes any sense, but it just helps build your endgame intuition, I guess, basically. I have a bonus question for you guys, actually. So, okay. So, knight and bishop versus queen. Say it's just something like this. Okay, say black to move. Okay. Now, do you guys think this is a win for white, or can black draw?
Can it be stalemate?
I think it's a draw.
What's that?
Can black make it stalemate? No.
Well, he can't stalemate himself because he has 2 pieces, but...
I think it's a draw.
You think it's a draw? You are correct.
It's
But
right.
black, again, you have to go to the right corner, and you have to arrange your pieces in a very specific way in order to draw. Do you guys know how to do that?
I feel like
So you want to go to the right corner in this case?
HA.
You want to go like H1?
In this case, you want to go to the dark squared corner.
HA,
Oh,
right?
wow.
Because as you move your king that way, you want to cut off the queen's ability to attack it.
Yeah, so let's just say the king should go to HA.
Yeah.
Okay, now how should you arrange the bishop and knight?
Okay.
You want to keep the white king and queen out.
So So let's see.
So where should we put these pieces?
Knight on G8, bishop on H6.
Okay, so say we arrange our pieces like
Bishop
so.
G7.
Now this doesn't work because white can invade with the king, say on f7, and then white can mate you like say, you know, a queen here or something.
Okay.
So that doesn't quite work.
So what about king in the corner, bishop on G7, and knight on F8?
Close. So here the knight guards critical square on G6, but white can maneuver the king to
Oh,
f7 and it's a win, right?
yeah.
Wait, okay, so
Like for example, if it was white to move here, he would check, and then it's mate, right?
Yeah.
So close.
what do you do?
So where should that knight go?
H6.
If you go to h6, then g6 is weak.
Knight to G8.
So you might notice that f7 and g6 are important squares to defend.
Yeah, I was trying to change to F7.
So where can we put our knight to defend those squares?
E5.
Exactly.
Oh, my
Oh,
goodness.
really?
Oh, because the bishop protects. Oh, God.
So now black guards all of these squares around the king.
Jeez.
Wow.
And there's a draw because white can't get the king close.
How outside box.
So what moves do you make as black to just stall for time? You shuffle the king?
Yeah, you can either move the king or the bishop depending on
Okay.
what's possible.
Yeah.
Well, there you couldn't move the bishop, but yeah.
Most of the time you can shuffle your king back and forth.
Okay.
Because white can't guard both g8 and h7. If that makes any sense.
So you're building a bridge again.
Yeah, so your knight's invulnerable because guarded by the
Yeah.
bishop, and your bishop guarded by the king. So yeah, this is the only way to arrange a bishop and knight to draw, though.
Wow. Oh, wow.
So yeah, just a bonus. This is probably incredibly rare. I don't know if it's even ever happened, but if you ever have bishop and knight versus queen, you know how to draw.
Yeah. A draw is always better than a loss.
Yeah. As the Russians say, there are two good results in chess.
Yeah.
A win and a draw.
Yeah.
So yeah, hope you guys liked it.
Yeah, it was good.